Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.blogspot.com, and Castalia House. So the speech by President Trump in Houston the other day was one of the most inspiring and satisfying speeches that I have seen a president make. And the reason that it was exciting is that it's one of the first times that we have seen a president actually stand up for the American nation. Now we'll give some folks a few minutes to tune up. And thanks to all the Q2s. You guys really crushed it. We'll be talking publicly about that soon, but not yet. So I don't have a new mic. In fact, this is a very old mic, but it's from my music and production days. And so actually the USB interface I had for it was so old that it didn't work very well with Windows 10, and so I switched it out, stopped using it. I just thought, well, I can't use that one. And then it turned out that with a new USB interface, I picked up a new generation Scarlett, and works fine. Last night's problem with the one channel was that the Windows setting was incorrect. I had it set to 2 channels, and of course the mic only plugs into 1, so I just needed to adjust the setting to a single channel. And there we go. As you know, with Infogalactic, with Castalia House, with Arkhaven, we are always playing the iterative game. We're always seeking continual improvement. So one of these days we may have to do something about the camera as well. I'm a little leery of that. Last thing I need at my age is better lighting and high definition. So, but yes, the audio quality is so good we could call it the mic stream. Anyhow, to get back to the subject, I want to read something that Trump said today, or last night really. America is winning again. America is respected again because we're the first. We're putting America first. It hasn't happened in a lot of decade. We're putting them first. We're taking care of ourselves for a change. Like that guy, but not that much. But radical Democrats want to turn back the clock for the rule of corrupt, power-hungry globalist. Do you know what a globalist is? A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. They have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Nationalist. Nothing wrong. Use that word. Use that word. They reported yesterday that Donald Trump was unpopular with foreign nations. He's one of the most unpopular presidents in the history of polling. And I said, of course I'm unpopular with foreign nations because we're not letting them rip us off anymore. And that's really significant because what it means is that Donald Trump is serious about putting America first. It means putting America's interests ahead of the global economy. It means putting the interest of the American people above those of the Israeli people. It means putting the interests of the American people above starving people in Africa. And it means putting the interests of Americans above people who just want a better lives for them and their children. And so what we're seeing is exactly what a woolly ram commented on, the Overton window being pushed to the right. Nationalism has a negative tone applied to it, imputed to it, because what the left has done ever since World War II is that they've claimed that nationalism is somehow related to National Socialism. Now that's absolutely absurd. The Nazis were not nationalists. If they were nationalists, then why on earth were they running around conquering Slavic peoples? Why on earth were they conquering the French? Why were they seeking to establish an empire in Africa? The Nazi Party was a German supremacist imperialist party. There is a big difference between nationalism and imperialism. In the case of nationalism, you want to pursue the interests of your own nation. You do not necessarily want your nation to rule over other nations, because in fact, imperialism tends to be very, very bad for the nation. Imperialism usually ends up with foreigners ruling over the people as their empire. This happened in Rome. This happened in China. This happened in India. And so it even happened, of course, in the British Empire. Who ruled over the British Empire? It was a bunch of Germans. You know, the whole reason that the family is called Windsor is because they needed to give it a fake English name. You know, Mountbatten? Mountbatten is the name of the cousins, right? That's because their real name is Battenberg. You know, Mountbatten is the Anglicization of Battenberg, which is the, if I recall correctly, is actually the proper name of the English royal family. They're Germans. That's what happens when you have empires. You end up with an Austrian ruling over a bunch of Germans and telling them to establish a European empire. Same thing with Napoleon. He wasn't French, he was Corsican. You see this again and again and again and again. Nationalism is about putting your extended family first. And that's why it's a good thing. That's why it is an important thing. The funny thing is that the left only celebrates fake nationalism. They only celebrate these fake nations that are constructed in places like Africa where there are no nations. They drew the lines crossing various tribal boundaries. You know, and whether you're talking about the Middle East, part of the reason that there's so much war and so much strife in the Middle East and Africa is because there isn't sufficient nationalism. The states, they're not nations. The states that were created there were not organic. They were artificial structures imposed upon them by foreigners. And that's one of the reasons why you're constantly seeing the various tribes in conflict over who gets to roll over each other. The state is not the nation. A state is a political entity. A nation is a people. And you don't need to have a state to have a nation. The Jewish nation has existed for thousands of years. It's only been a state since 1948. So obviously the nation is not the state. And so you look at other forms of fake nationalism. The worst one in the United States is civic nationalism. And what civic nationalism does is it turns the state into an ersatz nation. But it's fake. You know, the Americans like that idea. Americans romanticize that idea, but even that idea is mostly imposed upon them. You know who were the people that came up with the idea of America as being some sort of concept, an artificial concept that you could become? It was originally the French, and then after that, it was the Jews. That was not an American concept. You know, when they talked about, if you read the Declaration of Independence, what do they talk about? Who are they declaring independence from? They're declaring independence from King George, who is the King of Great Britain, and it even discusses their British brothers in the Declaration of Independence. They knew that Americans were intrinsically British, that the American nation is not the same as the United States of America. They're two different things. And so Jeremy puts it correctly. Civic nationalism is to nationalism what social justice is to justice. The adjective modifies and transforms the noun and turns it into something that it is not. Now, there's nothing wrong with having an emotional attachment to civic nationalism. You know, the whole USA, USA, the idea of unity, out of many one, and so forth. It's not the worst thing. But it is also not true nationalism. And that's why it's so much weaker. And so, this is something that Americans are always going to struggle with. They're always going to lack true national identity. And that's why it's so important. It's more important in the United States to build up a sense of nationalism, a sense of extended family, a sense of unified purpose. You know, it's very, very important for the United States to have that, because otherwise it will go the way of all empires. It will break apart, it will split apart, and there will be war. And, that's probably unavoidable at this point, because the United States is the subject of the largest human migration in human history. And such movement of peoples has always been directly related to significant violence, to significant conflict and war. And so, the biggest problem that the United States currently faces is its demographic diversity. It's not going to survive that. And so, the sooner that, Donald Trump understands this. And so he is doing what he can to prevent the situation from devolving into the chaos and conflict that is probably inevitable over time. And that's why the way that he deals with this caravan of 7,000 migrants who are openly stating their intention to invade the United States, that's why it's so important how he deals with it. Because there are already other caravans that are doing the same thing. And so, but here's what I need to point out. Like, for example, see, this is where people are wrong and they just don't get it. We can develop healthy nationalism by letting the appropriate immigrants in, immigrants who want to be American. My grandfather was an Italian immigrant and proudly fought in World War II for the USA. So what? I mean, that's great. But he's still Italian. You know? What's interesting to me is the same people who claim that an Italian who moves to the United States is just as American as you or anybody else doesn't accept the idea that I'm an Italian, despite the fact that I've lived here for 20 years. Despite the fact that I speak the language, I'm integrated, all that sort of stuff. But see, the thing is, he said he identified as American is the point. I bet he didn't. I bet he still identified as Italian. And what people don't understand is how intrinsically offensive that is, because what you're doing is you're denying the natives their identity. Oh, I mean, Muammar Gaddafi actually stated that everyone can be American, and nobody has any more right to consider themselves American than anyone else, not even the people living in America. Okay? If you are an Italian or a Nigerian or an Australian identifying as an American, that is no more intrinsically legitimate than Bruce Jenner identifying as a woman, or as your dog declaring itself to now be a cat. Your genetics are the same. Your chromosomes are the same. They don't change. All you're doing is you're claiming that being an American is nothing but a social construct, and that is historically false. You know. So anyhow, a dog born in a stable is not a horse. An Italian born in the United States is not an American. Now, obviously, you know, you can say, well, there's multiple definitions of American and blah, blah, blah. I mean, yes, you can play that game if you want to. And you can also point out that Canadians are American, Hondurans are American, Mexicans are American. Look, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with these people. Okay? I'm not saying that there's anything wrong intrinsically with people who have, you know, made the move, integrated well, become good citizens and all that sort of thing. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm not saying they're, you know, I mean, what's done is done. But at the same time, to deny the existence of an entire people, to deny the reality of a historical nation and claim that it doesn't exist is intrinsically offensive, and people should take offense at it. You know, who is American? Americans, the true Americans, are the posterity of the founders. They're not 100% English. You know, there were people, because of the way that the Revolutionary War was fought and so forth, there were Dutch, there were Germans and so forth that were included in that. But it is right there in the Constitution. It's written for the people of the time and their posterity. If your people came over after that, you are not truly an American any more than the people who came over and fought the Revolutionary War are Indians. Not in the deeper, genuine nationalist sense. Now, a lot of people can say, well, you know, then there's not that many Americans. Well, that's true. There's also not that many Indians. you know, I'm not interested in trying to dictate the future. I am simply honestly and truthfully observing the past. And if you don't like the past, I don't care. It's true. You know? And so, and this is what's so difficult for a lot of people to accept, because it's contra everything they've learned, in their elementary school patriotic songs. It's contrary to what they learned in the Pledge of Allegiance. It's contra what they learned about the melting pot and the creedal nation and all this sort of thing. But it's still true. And sometimes the truth is only what it is. Maybe you're only part American. So what? If it's true, it's true. I'm only part Indian. It is what it is. And so, you need to, let's see. Lamarck says, what about intermarriage? Say a German marries an American. Their children will be half American. Yes, absolutely. But you can't say they're American, 100% American, any more than you can say that they're 100% German. And so over time, you might see a new nation that is essentially half German, half British. Who knows what we'll call it? These are moving targets. They move over time. They simply don't change over the course of a single generation. They don't change over the course of 3 generations. One of the things that's very interesting in Europe, especially in the towns and villages, is that you can literally see what village a person comes from. You can see, who has a certain last name just by looking at them. Not necessarily every time, but I'll give you an example. In a town that we first lived in, the coach and 10 of the 11 starting players on the football or on the soccer team were all named Bernasconi. They were all named Bernasconi, and they all looked a little bit alike. They all looked like cousins. Some of them looked, like brothers and practically like twins, but you could see immediately that they were all related. I didn't even have to open my mouth for people to realize that, oh, there's the American. It was a big, transformation the day that we went from being the Americans to our Americans. That was the point. It was kind of crazy. We would go for walks in the evening, walk around the town, and some people would greet us, but mostly they would just sort of leave us alone. I would say more civil than friendly. And then one day, I stopped, and an older man stopped me, and he said, we were speaking Italian, and he said, "You did martial arts." I said, "Yes, I did. How could you tell?" He said, "It's the way you move." He said, I was a national judo champion." And I said, oh, really, wow. And I asked him to tell me about it. He told me about it. He asked a little bit about the style of martial arts that I had studied. We talked a little bit about it. And, then went on our separate ways. I didn't think anything of it. The very next day, we go for a walk. And literally, everyone's like, chow, 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 chow. We're getting stopped by people. Oh, stop, have a drink. My wife is kind of like, what is going on? What happened? And I said that, I just talked to this guy yesterday for like 10 minutes. I don't know what the deal is. And then, one day I was driving home, and I saw the bar at the center of town, and the old guy that I had talked to was sitting in the middle of this group of like 15 older guys. They're all just sitting around smoking, having coffee, having, it's like they're like having drinks at like 2 p.m. And I realized that they were the town elders. They were the people who decided for the town if people were okay or not. And after that day, that's when we went from the Americans to our Americans. And so I understand the concept of integration. But I also understand what most Americans don't, which is even when you're fully accepted, you're still not the same. You're still a guest. You can have the passport, you can speak the language, you can follow the local team, you can play for the local team, you can coach the local team. I've done all those things. But you need to be cognizant of the fact that you are not of the blood. Nationalism comes from the word nati. It means to be born. In Italian, the verb is nascere. When you talk about where you are born, sono nato di Boston. Nato, I was born. That's the same root as nationalism. And again, it doesn't mean that you can't get along. It doesn't mean that you can't be a valued member of the community. But you need to understand always that you are, at most, an honored guest, and never ever stand on your rights and claim to be just as much one of them. Because you're not. It's just not true. And so, my father is 66 years old, and he says that the mass migration issue in Europe and North America isn't going to change demographics majorly, and that the migrants will assimilate in a generation. Yeah, your father is a pretty typical boomer, unfortunately. He's completely and absolutely and utterly wrong. They simply cannot imagine a world any different than the world they knew. They can't accept or understand the reality. Now, it's true, intermarriage over time creates shared ethnicity and shared history. It does. But what else does it do? It destroys the existing society. It transforms it. It changes it into something that it was not before. And that's the problem, because people value their town. They value their traditions. They value their culture, their society. And when you're talking about assimilation, you are destroying it. When you assimilate coffee and chocolate and milk, you come up with something pretty good. You've got a mocha. I like mochas. But you know what? I don't want to put a mocha on my cereal. If I am having cereal, I don't want assimilated milk. I want milk. And so that's the thing that people need to understand. They need to understand that assimilation is not a good thing. It may be a better thing than the alternative. What are the alternatives? Conquest, slavery, ghettos. But don't think that assimilation is not also a form of societal destruction. It is. And even worse is when the quality of the assimilated immigrants is lower. There's a reason why the United States IQ is dropping. There's several reasons. Some are structural, educating women and making them, the educational system is insane. It's discivic, it's discivilizational. It's literally making people more stupid because the most intelligent women are the least likely to have children. That's a bad thing. And when you combine that with the fact that you are bringing in people who have an average IQ as much as 1.5 standard deviations below the native norm, guess what's going to happen? Sure, maybe they'll assimilate, but they'll certainly be less capable and less intelligent than the people before them. And so the society that you're going to have is going to be stupider, less capable, and more likely to run into the kind of problems that less developed societies have. So, anyhow, nationalism is a good thing. The God Emperor telling Americans that it's okay for them to be nationalist, the fact that he is setting up for the great struggle of the 21st century, nationalism versus globalism, is a good thing. And we should hope and we should pray that he is successful in those efforts because, he is probably the single most important figure in the United States when it comes to delaying the inevitable and hopefully making the inevitable less painful for everyone. So, the important thing to remember is that the truth is the truth. The facts are the facts. What happened in history happened. What we do with that is up to us. But don't ever make the mistake of pretending that history was different than it was, that the facts are different than you know them to be, just because it happens to make you uncomfortable or just because it forces you to think outside of the little box that you've been trained to keep your ideas in. So have a good evening. We'll see you at the next Darkstream. I'm Vox Day.